I'm here today to just give you a very quick introduction to how to go about purchasing crypto assets. So just from converting the dollars or euros or pounds in your bank account into Bitcoin, Ethereum, or CryptoKitties, whatever suits your fancy. So high-level introduction here. So unclear of, obviously there's probably varying degrees of experience in the audience. So this will start at quite a general level. So the first place you get started typically, if you are interested in purchasing crypto assets, is to go to a fiat gateway. So this will be a platform online, such as Coinbase or Xapo, where you can connect your bank account to it and reach out to purchase typically some of the major crypto assets out there, like Bitcoin or Ethereum, as kind of a first gateway in. Obviously, these tend to be highly regulated. There's usually a limit to the amount you can put in at first. For larger dollar amounts, it's usually smart to, or you'd usually have to use an OTC provider, like Galaxy or something of that nature. So once you have purchase these crypto assets via one of these platforms, like a Bitcoin or Ethereum, it's important to know that you might not want to keep those crypto assets on that platform. So it's not necessarily considered safe to kind of leave assets on these centralized gateways or exchanges. They tend to be lucrative targets for hackers. There have been a number of instances of these exchanges being broken into. And ultimately, you're not really in control of your assets if they are on these platforms, because you don't really have your own private keys. And if you don't have your private keys, you don't really control your assets. So you might be wondering, what is a private key? So public key cryptography is the underpinning of all blockchain technology. It is a subject for a talk that is much longer than 10 minutes. It would probably take a few hours to fully cover it in depth. But the important component is that it relies on two key concepts, or two critical concepts. So the public key and the private key. So public, and these tend to be strings of numbers. So the public key is the piece of information that proves that something exists or out there in the world, whether it's a Bitcoin or a secure message. And then the private key is something that is known only to the owner of that, and it's used to prove ownership or authentication of that piece of data or message, right? And that piece of data could be something like a Bitcoin or an Ether. So the question about that then becomes, what do you do with your private keys if you want to have them yourself? So there's typically two types of places where you can put them. One is kind of a hot wallet, and the other is cold storage. So a hot wallet, and they both serve very different purposes. So a hot wallet is going to be a device that's connected to the internet. It might be on your phone, your computer. And a cold storage might be something that is not connected to the internet, whether it's a piece of paper or a computer, something that's not connected to the internet that can't be accessed regularly. These serve very different purposes for crypto assets, and you might choose to use both. So a hot wallet's going to be much more convenient to use. So that'll be like your walking around money. The utility tokens you want to use with a given DApp, for instance. Whereas cold storage is where you're probably going to store any kind of significant amounts of assets you have. So within cold storage, there's typically kind of two common types of cold storage that are deployed. One is a paper wallet, and the second is a hardware wallet. So a paper wallet is just a piece of paper that can have your public key and your private key that you store. A hardware wallet is typically a kind of little electronic device that can be used to authenticate transactions without having to type your private key into a computer. And it makes sure that the private key doesn't leave the device. So these, and I should say one thing about the hardware wallet typically. So hardware wallets, typically, you would also want to back up your private keys many times. So there's a service, or there's a system that was proposed in BIP 39 that allows for converting these private keys, which are these complex strings of numbers, into a set of human-readable words that you can memorize or write down, and is typically recommended by all these hardware wallet providers, that you do write down that key and store it in a similar way to how you would probably want to store a paper wallet somewhere offline. So, of course, there are plenty of risks to holding your private keys as well that you need to be cognizant of and manage, right? So the computer device could lose your keys, the place where you hid your keys could catch fire, it could get stolen. So it's important to be cognizant of these risks and think about options for redundant backup of these private keys to keep them fully secure. So now that we basically have purchased one of these reserve crypto assets like Bitcoin or Ethereum and have securely stored them, then we're finally at the place where you could begin to exchange them for other crypto assets. Now, there's a number of platforms out there that you could use to accomplish this. I would say there's one important distinction to be aware of these days, which is that there are centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges. They all have their trade-offs, and it's not just what the price one exchange has is out there. So a centralized exchange, you're typically looking at an easier user interface to engage with, whereas you have much more complicated user experience when you move towards the decentralized exchange piece. It's all a trade-off. It's a question of what you want to use, and you might choose to use different exchanges on different ends of the spectrum depending on what your purposes are for a given trade. So now that's how you go out and buy other tokens. So at that point, you could buy Cosmos, like Jay was just talking about, or anything else at that point on many of these exchanges. And then, additionally to that, you might consider buying something like a crypto collectible. And some of these, you might just go to the portal of the D app itself to buy, so like a CryptoKitties. You just go to cryptokitties.co and you could begin purchasing CryptoKitties and engaging with that application directly once you have the Ethereum. Or you could go to some of these secondary exchanges. So these crypto collectibles are kind of an emergent phenomenon over the past few months in the space, and they're often treated quite similarly to how you might think about buying art or trading cards or any other kind of collectible, right? You might consider buying them both for use and enjoyment, as well as in hope that they might appreciate in value and you can sell them on a secondary exchange over time. And this is kind of an emergent area of exchange that has popped up recently that has been getting quite a bit of traction. So there you have it, from dollars in your bank account to CryptoKitties, should you care to buy them.